Greetings everyone, welcome back to ISN Global. Quite war is being fought at sea right now and it's escalating fast. We need to focus on this that United Kingdom is threatening to use military force to seize Russian oil tankers, and Russia has responded by sending their warships to escort them through the European waters. France has already boarded one and the US has seized several. This isn't about a future conflict, it's happening right now in the English Channel, the North Atlantic, and the Mediterranean. In the next 5 minutes, I'll explain you what's going on and why this could reshape global security and energy markets. First, we need to understand what is Russia's shadow fleet. When Western nations they imposed sanctions on Russian oil after the 2022 Ukraine invasion, the goal was to cut Moscow's war revenue, but Russia found a way around it. It assembled a massive network of aging oil tankers, hundreds of them, to keep its crude flowing to willing buyers, mainly in India, China, and parts of the Middle East. This network is called the Shadow Fleet. Here's how it works. These ships sail under false flags, registering in countries like Panama, Gabon, and Palau, where oversight is minimal. They switch off their tracking systems mid-voyage to disappear from the satellite monitoring. They do that so nobody can see them. They do ship-to-ship transfers in open seas to disguise where the oil actually came from. Most of them operate without valid insurance to create serious environmental risks, because one major spill from these aging vessels could be catastrophic for our world. And the scale is staggering. According to the ISN Global, the Shadow Fleet now comprises nearly 1,000 tankers, roughly one of the 5 oil tankers around the world. Russia relies on the fleet around 80% of its oil exports, which generate tens of billions of dollars a year that directly fund the Ukraine war. So Western sanctions were supposed to cap the Russian oil at $60 a barrel, but the Shadow Fleet has made that cap largely meaningless. For years, Western governments they relied on financial pressures, sanctions, insurance bans, and port restrictions. It wasn't enough. Now they're shifting to hard power. And the United Kingdom government has identified a legal mechanism under its 2018 Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act to authorize military boarding to seize the Shadow Fleet tankers. They are sanctioned, unflagged, or flying false flags. British defense planners are preparing options involving Royal Navy warships, RAF surveillance aircraft, and special boat service commandos. And operations have already begun. So on 7 January 2026, the US Navy and Coast Guard they seized the Russian flag tanker Marinera in the North Atlantic after tracking it for weeks. And the United Kingdom they provided direct support with the RAF surveillance aircraft and the Royal Fleet, and a tanker had been linked to sanctions invasion networks involving Russia, Iran, and militant group Hezbollah. It was escorted on Moray 5th of Scotland, where it remains under the US Coast Guard watch. Moscow has called the seizure a gross violation of international maritime law. On January 2022, French naval forces, they aided by British intelligence and Royal Navy tracking from HMS Dagger, they boarded and diverted the tanker Grinch in the Mediterranean Sea. The vessel had departed from Russia and was suspected of flying a false flag. President Macron said, "We will not tolerate any violation." Ukraine's President Zelensky, they praised France and said, "This is exactly the kind of resolve needed to ensure that Russian oil is no longer financing Russia's war." In total, the United States has seized at least 7 vessels linked to Shadow Fleet operations since the late 2025. And the UK has sanctioned over 520 ships. The EU has sanctioned nearly 600, and they are preparing for a toughest package yet. UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has said that London stands ready to stronger enforcement, and they did not rule out using oil from seized vessels to help Ukraine's war efforts. Here's the gap between rhetoric and the reality. Despite all this, at least 8 sanctioned tankers were tracked involving through English Channel. They were moving from there in a single day, January 30, and the dozens have passed through since the start of 2026. Now let's take a look at what Russia's response is. So Russia, they are not backing down. They are escalating regarding that. In June 2025, Russian Navy, they took an unprecedented step. Corbett Boyke openly escorted 2 sanctioned tankers, the Selva and Syra, through the English Channel, under military protection. This is important because this was the first time documented case of Russia using naval force to shield their sanctions evading commercial vessels. And the Royal Navy's HMS Mersey and HMS Severn shadowed the Russian group with a wildcard helicopter gathering intelligence. Now, Finland Defense Minister, they called the escorts unprecedented and aggressive. And the naval analysts, they say that Russia is now deliberately testing how far NATO will go regarding this issue. Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, they issued a blunt warning. He said that Shadow Fleet tankers will be escorted by security ships and warned that areas close to navigation may arise. An attempt may be made to block critical straits and channels. He compared British politicians to the pirate Blackbeard. When the US pursued the Marine era, Putin reportedly dispatched a submarine and military aircraft to escort it. And that was a dramatic show of force that we have seen. Analysts are not calling this gray war at sea. Not a full military confrontation, but a dangerous space where economic sanctions enforcement and military operations, they are blurring together. And the risk of miscalculation, it is very real. What's at stake here? The confrontation has serious consequences that are beyond the ships that are involved. We have the energy markets as well, because if Western enforcement they tighten further, analysts say 2 to 3 million barrels of Russian oil could be taken off from global markets. That would push prices up worldwide. So oil will be high up in coming days. EU's 20th sanction package, which is expected around February 24, on the anniversary of Ukraine invasion, it may include a total ban over the maritime services for Russian crude, which will force Moscow to rely on the Shadow Fleet. Russia's oil, their revenues are already projected to fall sharply, possibly $125 billion in 2026, which were down around $155 in the 2025. And a shift from financial sanctions to military seizures on the high seas is a historic turning point. For decades, international trade depended on freedom of negotiations. Now what's happening is NATO navies, they boarding commercial vessels, Russia responding with warship escorts, and it all sends a precedent that affecting global shaping from years. Legal experts warn that unilateral high seas enforcement against foreign flag vessels is highly escalatory and could damage international maritime law. Our death scenario is already being discussed openly. What happens when a Western Navy tries to board a Shadow Fleet tanker that's being escorted by a Russian warship, which is very crucial. Now, this is the kind of confrontation that could spiral. Russia has already held naval exercises in the Baltic specifically to train and protecting commercial shipping from hostile indirection. Most importantly, this is all happening alongside the collapse of the last nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia, which has expired on February 5, 2026. Also, China's nuclear arsenal, they are expanding rapidly. Iran and Venezuela, they are cooperating with Russia through shared Shadow Fleet networks. So this international order that kept great power politics in check is fraying on multiple fronts simultaneously. What we're watching is a new kind of conflict, which is brought from warships, sanctions, oil tankers instead of traditional battles, but the risks are very real. NATO forces, they are boarding Russian-linked tankers. NATO is sending warships and submarines to protect them, which is a new thing we are seeing. The threats are being made about blocking shipping lanes. Oil markets are on edge, and the guardrails that once kept great powers in tensions in check are disappearing. The Atlantic Council, they said the moment where economic warfare meets the gunboat diplomacy. They showed that even related to that. Now the question is, how far does this go before someone miscalculates? High chances are high, I would say. So what do you guys think? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to ISN Global. Thank you.